Yeah. So, look, the question is an overall bigger picture strategy. Obviously, with a young quarterback in place, it's certainly a little clearer than it was this time last year. And yet, yeah, I would say first off, it's a little clearer. There's still certain things that we've identified that we think are important. And then the puzzle is with free agency and the draft, trying to best meet those needs. And so we've kind of had our front board meeting already with the draft. We're seeing these guys now this week. And then we've also had a good jump start in free agency relative to the film study and the priorities. So it's good to be in that position, and we've got to be able to take advantage of it.
Sean, you've talked about wanting a joker. What is your confidence level or thoughts in maybe finding that guy in the first round of the draft?
Oh, well, I mean, when you pick 20, it's not as easy to say, hey, we're going to find that, because that player can be a running back, it can be a tight end, and yet it's just something that we're mindful of as we look at both the draft and free agency. And I use that term, it's just when you have one of those guys that are matchup challenges inside, really helps you a third down red zone, because there's ways defensively you can handle the outside receivers and force the ball inside. So, but that's something that we'll look closely at.
You're talking about puzzles, wants, and needs.
Yeah.
How would you categorize running back and tight end? How important is it from one of those positions to be able to better control the middle of the field offense?
Well, I think it helps. It helps. So, the tight end or running back being able to be a target relative to the center of the field. Different than a guard or an edge rusher or corner. Like sometimes, a draft might only have maybe a candidate or two at one of those positions. So, certainly you hit a couple positions that would fit in the must realm, and yet I would say not at all costs. It's got to be something that makes sense when we're either signing them in free agency or drafting them, but it is a priority.
Do you have to address Cortland with his contract situation?
No, I think, look, George and I were just talking about it. Those discussions will take place. George, Cortland's representatives, and we felt like he had a real good season. He's important to what we're doing. So all of that will happen in time, and I don't think now's the time. Say it again. Yeah. Quite a few of them. Yeah. Look, it's part of the deal, and I've always said that you want to see your assistants do well. So we try to, if possible, promote from within, and then in certain cases, hire outside if we have to. And I'm happy for all those guys, whether it's Declan, Johnny, Chris, Mooj. Sometimes, a lot of times, it's a byproduct from winning. So I'm excited for their opportunities.
On that subject,
Yeah. No, I don't think anything surprises you. The only reason I say that is, look, I've been with Declan for a while. He's 28. I know he's young. But they're not asking him to be the primary play caller. He's a real sharp offensive mind, great thinker. We hired him at a young age coming from Iowa. And I don't think you get surprised anymore because, look, to his credit, he had a relationship and there was a confidence level just in visiting with a couple of the coaches, and then certainly Ben, when he's got a vision for what he wants and what he needs from that position, and I think he'll do really well. Say it again. Yeah.
at the start of your program. It really says something, I think, just in that fact. What is it about him that you want to
Well, he's super passionate. We're talking about Johnny Morton now. Super passionate. Man, he works his tail off. He's great with film study and ideas. He's one of those guys that'll, bring you red zone, third down, like a lot of information. We were together in New Orleans several times, and then, it's a chance, where he's going to be calling the plays. And so I was just with Dan Campbell a few minutes ago, maybe an hour ago, and we were talking about him, and he'll do a great job. Yeah, good question. Just relative to the numbers, I'm still always mindful more's not better, and that you got to be careful about that. We try to have a couple young coaches on each side of the ball, and maybe one in the kicking game that are in entry-level positions. And then I think it really gets back to, obviously coaching ability is important, passion's important, compatibility is important. All of those traits, I think, as you're building a team, you're counting on from your coaches. So I would say to some degree it hasn't changed much, and yet I think I certainly have changed relative to how I look at the process, and some of the mistakes in years past or when I was younger may have been those mistakes where I was in a hurry or felt like I needed to be in a hurry. And there's a lot of young talented coaches, even at at a number of different levels, and so we've kind of taken our time. At some point here, we'll announce the completion of our staff. We're not there yet, but I just think you got to be real careful that it's not too many.
How do you kind of thread that needle and walk that line when you know maybe not too many?
Well, when there's not an office for them, like when you're putting a divider in, then that's a sign. But you kind of have an idea in your mind, and look, I would say the younger coaches obviously are ambitious, and that's not a bad thing. But you're always trying to make sure, hey, focus on where you're at, because those other things will kind of take care of themselves. And I think that, fortunately, I've had a really good staff here my first 2 years in Denver, and it's helped us tremendously. Yeah, with both of and it's a unique room. It's a good question. I don't know that I have the answer. Both Zach and Jared are free agents. So obviously one of the musts, if a player's on our board, even though he was with us, if he's a free agent, so both of those show up as orange tags. So that's a must. We have to, secure who the backup is. There are probably a few moving parts there, but I was real pleased with the room. And then the uniqueness off the field, those guys get along well and really work together well. Well, the number one thing would be having a chance to visit with these guys in person. I don't know how many years this has been now. Remember, the beginning of the combine was to combine medical information. That was the purpose of it. We were, as a league, all the teams were going to see these guys, asking them to basically get looked at multiple times. So, and then they ran them on a 40, then we had some other drills, and then we said, let's interview them. And so it's grown. But I would say for me, it's having a conversation in a 20-minute time frame, maybe an informal conversation, but putting a face with the name and the film that we're going to study. And we'll get all this on video, but I think that's one part of it. And then two, seeing them, kind of on the hoof, so to say, seeing them in person. Yeah, Michael Wilhoit. So look, we're kind of like where you're at right now. We're on top of it relative to the local authorities as well as the league office. We're monitoring that process, and we'll follow the proper protocols and channels. But right now, that's where it's at.
How has the vision for Troy Franklin evolved in this group?
Yeah, so we see him as a Z. We move our guys around a little bit, so it's not exclusively. Thought he had a good rookie year, and he's kind of sometimes in that same position where Mims is at. So we have two guys. Certainly, we've gotten faster because both of those guys can run, and we saw kind of that growth spurt with Marvin in year 2, but I would say I was real pleased with how he handled the totality of his, the rookie season. It can be difficult, and I kind of see him in that role.
What kind of coach Jets getting?
AG, they're getting someone who's super passionate. I think we're in that profession. That's important. He's confident. He's certainly earned that opportunity, and I spoke to him the night before he took that job, and I could feel his excitement. And I go all the way back to I was with him when he was a player for us in Dallas, and then had a chance to hire him. He was a scout, I think, when I hired him, and he first got into coaching. He was one of the best. Look, I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of great assistants work for me, and Aaron was right there at the top. Everyone got along well with him. He loved his job. He communicated well with his players. You saw that when he became a coordinator, and I think you're going to see that in New York, and I'm excited for him. Two different coaches, yeah. So DA, I hired in 06 as a quality or defensive line assistant. His background was certainly a defensive backs. Eventually, he became defensive backs. Then was actually hired by Denver as a coordinator, and then, might have been the Raiders. So I lost him a couple times, I think. No, Denver, then the Raiders, and then I hired him back. He's a real good teacher. Thorough, another guy that is great with the staff. And then Dan Roshar and I worked together at Illinois in 1996, and I hired him from Michigan State. He initially came as running backs, and then eventually was promoted to offensive line. He too again was a great teacher. It was more than just a friend. Like, I didn't know Dennis Allen. I knew Dan. Sometimes, that's not the kicker at all. But they're really good teachers, and they're guys that are going to get along well in the building. They have all those traits that we value. So I think, Chicago's helped themselves, obviously, with a number of these guys. So I'm happy for Ben and the staff he's putting together.
You guys are obviously a team on the rise. Just how much confidence do you have that this team could do some damage in 2025?
Yeah, I think the one thing we have to avoid is this idea we're going to pick up where we left off. I really don't like that because our league has shown anymore, the season ends and you kind of take the proverbial game board and you take all the pieces and dump them and then you set it back up and you start again. Certainly you're more confident. The experience has helped a number of players. But, the journey begins. So we've got, and we don't shy away from it. Our expectations are high, and I'm encouraged with some of the things that we did this past season, and yet still kind of hungry for more.
We see Carroll to your right. I'm wondering what you think of coaching in this division that's arguably the most decorated in the NFL.
I'm the youngest. Thanks, Pete. No, listen, we've had so many good games and battles. When he was at Seattle, Andy and Harb, Jim. Sometimes it's coincidence, but there's without a doubt, that your division opponent is going to be extremely well coached. And that's just proof in the pudding with all three of those guys.
Look, when you go back at your career, man,
we're still trying to collect it.
When you think over your career, have you ever seen a situation like this in the division? Like that
So if you went back to the NFC East, and we're talking about just coaches in divisions, I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but Gibbs and Parcells and Landry, I don't know who was at Philly at that time, St. Louis, the division was bigger then. But certainly my first year in New Orleans, you know, a couple of my closest coaching friends that I'd worked with, you know, we had to find a way to get past Gruden in Tampa, and Foxy was at Carolina, Jim Moore Jr. at Atlanta. So when it comes to your division and you're playing those teams twice, you know, I'd rather be looking at someone else than Pete right now, but that's a credit to what he's accomplished, and I think a good hire, obviously. Running back. So I would say Audric and Blake and also Tyler, you know, Bede are all three young players, and Jaleel I would put in that category. But overall, from a running back perspective, you know, we've got to continue to look, whether it's in the draft. And I say this respectfully, I think it's a position that, generally speaking, you can find either in free agency or throughout the draft. But I've been a part of drafts where we've selected runners high. Is it a priority for us? I think certainly improving our running game is going to be a priority, and we feel like we've got the right offensive line and the right group of players to give us a chance at that. But this draft has got a number of runners in it, and it's just a matter of what you're looking for. But we'll see where we go from there. Go ahead. Where have I grown the most? I've said this before to you guys. You get a little wiser, and you don't stress about some of the things that you learn. What's worth burning your calories and energy on. You get a little bit more wiser relative to understanding what's really important, and then maybe something that's not at all. Both. I saw that. I'm not going to wish him any happy birthday on there.
How often do you talk to him over the offseason?
I sent him a text.
If you were to consider a tight end early in the draft, how important is it for that tight end to be someone that also impacts the run game as well as being a pass catcher?
Well, you generally don't get both coming out of college, and I say that respectfully. You know, I'll ask the scouts as they're reading the player. They usually typically do one really well and the other, and that's okay. I think historically speaking, it's been a little easier to take the receiving tight end and work with him on his technique relative to run blocking than it is the run blocking tight end and make him a really good receiver. I've just seen that happen much more often than the latter.
Sean, with transferring becoming so commonplace for a lot of these prospects, some of it NIL and other
Yeah.
reasons, do you still need to dig into the why of
Sure.
the decision to read it?
Sure. There's some relative to the transfers, the amount of transfers. We get a whole history report. We're getting past that. Not yet. We're getting past that little COVID stint, you know, where guys were. But yeah, tracking the players still. I would say anybody that's transferred, that area scout will read, and George and I will clearly have a grasp as to, was it financially motivated? Was it playing time? Did they go up? Did they go down? Because we are seeing movement both ways, and we'll have a pretty good handle on that. But it's a good question. Yeah.
How the value of Oregon's pro day seemed to work together in that setting beyond just on the tape. There's a lot of other Oregon guys at that pro day, including juniors, who are now in this
Yeah.
12 year. What insight further did you glean even from both?
Well,
About his brother, about Terrence?
I'll ask. It would be very common for us in a draft meeting, and it could be, all right. We'll say it's Oregon. and we'll be looking at a player, and I might just shoot a text to one of those guys like, hey, tell me what you guys, and then maybe there's a call, just while we're watching the film. If we're looking at a TCU player, I'm texting my son, who worked there as a student assistant. If we're looking at a Penn State, so that would be very common. And then the follow-up, in the locker room more specifically, all right, talk to me more, then it kind of continues. And so you're gathering as much information as you can to help be as accurate as you can on the decision-making process. And to your point, we were there at the pro day, but the next day was the private workout, and you got to pay close attention. Like, it was interesting to see how many of his teammates, they had just finished working out Friday, and here it was Saturday morning, and man, there's another 10, and you pay attention to all of it, and the young running backs tugging on my coattails throughout the day. Hey, I got to know Alvin Kamara, and he's a good football player, and he and I are chatting, and 6 months later you're defending him and he's a pain in your rear, talking about Bucky. So I think it says a lot about the player, though, at his own day when so many guys showed up.
Besides being Bill's brother, what does a receiver who's under 160 pounds need to survive in the NFL?
Yeah. So look, relative to that, you do all your research. He's kind of played with a chip on his shoulder his whole career, I think, and that's a credit to him. And so, you evaluate the player, you look at the vision, try to come up with the vision, and then you discuss who's he like, and you kind of go from there.
You talked about people driving the bus,
Just in general,
right? And there was a healthy bit of skepticism of when Bo was drafted.
yeah.
Now they're saying, well, maybe this was his ceiling. What about Bo makes you think you haven't hit his ceiling, that there's much more there moving forward?
Just as you just had to watch the games, the narrative, and you just have to watch the athleticism, the learning curve. Look, if I did this, let's just say, from a media perspective for a living, and I have this vision as to what I think he is, and then all of a sudden, look, he's got plenty of arm strength. We saw it. Just look at all the numbers relative to his completions downfield. I think he was third in 20-yard completions. I mean, and I said this last year respectfully, I just think it's a tough position to evaluate, and there's a difference between entertainment and then from the club side where it's everything. And so the entertainment, and that's with no disrespect, but the access and to truly evaluate it properly. But it's a good lesson yearly that it can move a club certain directions if you're not paying attention, any position, and so we felt pretty confident that, and at that time a year ago, it wasn't like we didn't know who that was. We just felt like we'd be able to get that right, or at least have a good likelihood of getting it right. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I sat behind him. One of the things about that event, it had been a while since I'd gone, when you walk into NFL Honors and you look around the room, you could say, I know who's winning every award, because when the other candidates aren't there, it's a sign. And so I saw Josh Allen had the first two rows taken up on this side, and I thought, well, it looks like Josh is going to be anyway. I was sitting right behind Patrick and his family. I was thrilled for him. And then I was excited for Trey Hendrickson and also Zach Baun. Those are other players that were candidates that we had drafted. And then I think I gave Patrick a hard time, and I said, we might be able to get you in the Jordan shoes now, and he smiled. Well, I text Mickey, and I said, hey, when are you guys hiring your head coach? And he texted me back, he said, when are you hiring your special teams coordinator? And so I worked with Darren. I hadn't worked with him before New Orleans. the late Tony Sperano, a close friend of mine, who was the head coach of the Dolphins, I think was the first guy to bring him into our league. And you had to know Tony. For him to like rave about somebody, like that might be once every 3 years, but I know how Tony felt about him. So I can't remember the year we hired him in New Orleans. He's a tremendous teacher. He's thorough. And yet, with respect to the process, he was a very serious candidate, and I think will be a head coach in our league as well. But he was a very serious candidate in New Orleans, and we had time.
What's your initial reaction to Pete Carroll joining the AFC West?
Well, you missed it, but we were just talking about it. Excited for him and the opportunity, and I think I mentioned that it made me the youngest coach in the division, so I was excited about that. All right.
You were at the Nuggets game last night. I got talking to Michael Malone the first time you'd really talked. He joked because I asked him post game, he's gonna help you with your draft pick. But how
I saw that, so we'll allow him to assist us in the draft if we can work with Jokic was in that joker role, because I was getting interviewed about him being a quarterback, and I was just looking like, no, he's the perfect tight end. It was exciting for me to meet Mike. It was the first time I'd ever, our schedules are different. Joe Lombardi lives kind of on the same block, so I've heard a lot of good stories. He's the son of a coach. We're similar in age. He's a bit younger, but you could, you watch his teams play and you can see his passion. So it was good to finally meet him last night, and it was good they played well.
Look, going into year 3, now you have the same ownership with George. How much of an advantage is it having all that continuity?
Well, with regards to continuity, yeah, I would say clearly if your ownership, and it's not just your ownership is in place, the right ownership, and I would say that for Greg and Kerry and the Walton Penner family group, the right ownership in place, head coach, GM, and quarterback, that's a good start.
Coach, when it comes to Bo specifically, do you feel like a premium pick used on a tight end or a running back could best serve him in his development for year 2?
All right, good question. So the running back and the tight end could obviously help in his development. And then I would also say like a really good elite pass rusher can help in his development, a really good cover corner. And so I'm only saying that, meaning the best player that helps the team get better is going to help in his development. And sometimes I think that when you talk about getting him weapons, I mean, certainly that's important. And you mentioned 2 positions that obviously would help, but I think we got to look closely at what helps the team, because that in turn can really end up helping that position. But I think at 20, we'll have some good options. We're here to sort through those options right now, and we'll kind of go from there. 2 more questions. Right now, inside, we're talking about Drew. And last year, we kind of went into the offseason with the edge idea, and then we've kind of progressed enough to where he's gonna work inside. It's kind of how the season finished too. So we're gonna keep him right there.
Andy used to say, quarterback, you have to understand people are looking at you too. How important is that for Carroll to realize that people are spending time on him right now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. There'll be that year 1 to year 2. All right, we have an idea of what are some of his strengths. I think the one thing, all of us, myself included, the one thing that we got maybe a little bit even better than we expected was his speed and his, I don't want to say scramble ability, we saw that, but his running ability. He didn't run here. He had a turf toe, he later told me. Because I asked him, I thought, why he would do well in these shuttles. And so usually if that's something you're going to be ahead of your class, you would do. But he had a turf toe. And I would say coming away from that first year, there were a number of plays where I thought, man, we didn't see that on tape. Last one.
Is the day of bringing a rookie quarterback along with the time
I think it still depends, meaning it's a fair question. And if in year one, it depends on the team. I would say the earlier they're taken, the more pressure and the expectation is that we're going to see them, maybe not week one, but we're going to see them start at some point. And remember, the earlier they're taken, there's probably a good chance the team that has taken them that early is struggling. And that's why they're picking where they're picking. And so periodically you have these examples where even a few spots where Ben Roethlisberger was probably disappointed on draft day, and yet he ended up at a pretty special place, or the same thing with Aaron Rodgers, or the same thing. So I think a lot of it is where they're going. And then history's also told us that we're going to have starters that are taken after the first round. And you just have to find them.